I think you guys should be able to see my screen now. If you can't, let me know. Um, but super excited. Okay, we got thumbs up now. Perfect. I should know how to do this by now, but sometimes you still have technical difficulties. Um, anyway, super excited to um, talk to all of you today about one of my absolute favorite topics when it comes to coaching, which is storytelling. Um, yeah, we're going to dive into a lot of really great tips today. And in my opinion, this is the most important skill you can have when interviewing and recruiting for jobs and just succeeding in any role you have. We interact through words and we need to know how to tell stories. So we'll jump right into it. This is kind of the overview of what we're going to cover today. I'll talk a little bit about myself and my background, and then we'll talk about why stories matter and do some practice and instruction on how to improve your personal story, and then we'll jump into questions. So it'll be a quick 45-minute session today. Okay, so I'm Kristen. I currently work at Leland as a coach, strategy, and operations specialist. I do a lot of things here, but yeah, I started here as an intern and fell in love with it. But I also worked at Bain & Company as an intern. I've done some other internships in consulting and tech. And yeah, I mostly coach for management consulting and general career development. But I love mentoring people in a variety of ways. I used to be a volleyball coach for teenage girls. I have coached and tutored a lot of people in learning how to speak Spanish and just a variety of things. So yeah, I'm based here in Utah, where the Leland headquarters is, and I graduated in business strategy, or I'm going to graduate in a couple months in business strategy from BYU. Um, so let's dive into why great stories matter. This is, I think, understanding why stories matter and just understanding the objective of an interview can really help you change how you talk and change how you approach interviews. I think one of the biggest things that I see as I'm interviewing people in a variety of contexts is kind of like they don't want to take control of the situation, or they don't want to jump in and be excited to talk about something. They're a little bit more hesitant, a little bit unsure, what do you want me to say? But I think to summarize everything that interviewers are looking for, I have these kind of 8 questions. This isn't perfectly comprehensive, but I think it covers the broad idea of what people are looking for in any type of business technology job, really any job where you'd want to work, I think, when you're talking to people. So first one is, can you organize complex ideas? And why being able to tell a good story affects this is because if you can clearly talk about a past situation from 3 years ago, it's a really good indicator that you're also going to be able to take a mess of complicated data or a really complicated problem with a patient and clearly articulate that to somebody else. The next one is, can you create a coherent solution? And this is all about being able to take that complexity, take a problem, and solve it, and come up with a strong recommendation, have a strong opinion about what to do. The next one is, what unique experience do you offer? This has to do with everything related to who you are and your background. And I think sometimes people don't talk enough about this, or don't know honestly how to brag sufficiently about who they are and what they've done, because people want to know that when they're interviewing you. They want to surround themselves with great people and people who are going to be interesting. To the next point, would I want to be at dinner or delayed in an airport with you? This is a really important question, and one that I ask myself all the time. If I'm talking to somebody and they don't seem like someone that I would want to be in a voluntary or involuntary casual situation with, it's going to really affect my choice of, do I hire them or not. For the next one, are you proactive within ambiguity? What I think this shows is being able to often interviewers don't know exactly what they're going to ask you, or there might be some dead time, or you might be in, a casual networking conversation. And if you don't take ownership of the conversation and say a really compelling story, or, ask a really interesting question to the person that you're talking to, that really affects their perception of your proactivity. If you can't, in an interview conversation, really make the conversation great, then you're probably not going to like in an ambiguous, yeah, that's the right way to say it, I think, make that as effective. How do you respond to mistakes? Often you will talk about mistakes in a story. Often interviewers want to hear about, tell me a time that you worked with someone difficult, or tell me a time that you solved a really hard problem. So being able to, accurately convey that mistake and then show how you responded and how you took control, responded with positivity is really important. I also think another layer of this one in interviews that often happens is you might make a mistake, right? I think in every conversation I ever have, I say something I wish I would have said differently, or I respond to a question in an imperfect way. But being able to quickly recover and move on and continue to talk about something can make a massive difference in the interviewer's perception of you. Next one is, can you analyze information quickly? This depends on the interview and the role you're interviewing for and a lot of factors. Something I think about in consulting coaching a lot, but in many jobs, they want to see if you're able to ingest a lot of things, take something with complexity and get a good insight out of it. And we'll talk about this more later on, but being able to analyze something and say, like, for example, oh, like I told this story about 4 years ago when I, had this extremely difficult class and the professor didn't like me and gave me what I felt like was an unjust grade. And I, chose to respond to that and chose to communicate proactively and solve it. Like, okay, that's interesting, but you have to also be able to like take all of that information and like analyze that information to get insight. And so I think that's another really cool thing that stories can do is you can tell a story that's completely irrelevant. Like I mentioned, having coached volleyball, I talk a lot about sports. I talk a lot about different things I've done that are very like not work related, but being able to like take that different situation and then analyze it so it relates to the job I'm applying for, or the conversation I'm having, I think can really help set you apart. And then the last one is like kind of broad, but just can you communicate clearly, right? Does the interviewer leave the interview feeling like you expressed yourself well, like they have, a strong idea of who you are and that you answered their questions accurately and directly? Okay, we will go to the next slide. Now we're going to shift a little bit, and I want to kind of frame this conversation, this session, with a concept called identity capital. And I think this is part of why stories matter so much and telling good stories matters so much. So there's this quote from a book called The Defining Decade, and it says, identity capital is our collection of personal assets. It is the repertoire of individual resources that we assemble over time. These are the investments we make in ourselves, the things we do well enough or long enough that they become a part of who we are. All of you have identity capital. You can't be a human and not have any. Some of you may have more than others, or some of you may be more aware of your identity capital than others are. And so we're going to do a little exercise to help you kind of reflect on what your identity capital is. And think of this as kind of like you're building up a bank of experiences, of interests, of values, of relationships that you can then pull from in interview conversations to have a really great conversation and talk about yourself in a natural way. So, there are 5 questions here that I want to help you create 5 pieces of identity capital. They don't all have to come, like, you don't have to answer each question with one. You can definitely do more than 5. But just reflect on these things and write down a few things that you would consider identity capital. So life experiences that have shaped you and who you are today. This might be something hard that happened when you were younger. This might be having lived somewhere maybe different from a lot of the people you're around. It might be a job you've had in the past, or a like illness or mental health struggle that you've overcome, many things like that. What do people often compliment you on? Sometimes this is hard to think about, but you all do have these things, and what people compliment you on, I think, is a great way to identify like your strengths and kind of the pieces of the world that you like lean into, right? Some people might be really empathetic, some people might be really proactive or outgoing or thoughtful. All those things could be examples of that. Um, what topics, ideas, or issues do you think about in your free time? What challenges have you overcome? When have you done something against all odds? So I'm gonna give you guys like 2 minutes more or less to just write down some answers to these questions. And then feel free as you're doing that to share one of them in the chat, something that you'd like to do to help us get to know the group a little better. Okay. If you've come up with a few ideas, feel free to send something in the chat. Um, I'll share an example. One thing I often talk about. Oh, perfect. You shared one. Yeah, keep them coming. One thing I often talk about, and I think a big piece of identity capital in my life is that I grew up in a town with a population of 300. I was on a farm. We were raising cattle and alfalfa and corn, and it was just, yeah, very, very agricultural and non-urban world that I grew up in. And so learning about, consulting and business and tech was something that happened way later in life for me, but definitely shapes the way I see the world. Julian said growing up in two different countries has shaped who they are today. It's a great example. What other country did you grow up in? You can come off mute if you want to.
I grew up in South Korea, so we kind of spent time back and forth.
Nicole said first gen grad and founder of EdTech, initiative for the underrepresented, owning up to things. Those are all awesome. Josh said living abroad, in lots of different continents, working in multiple industries. That's great as well. Yeah, these are all really great examples. And I think what's really cool about this concept of identity capital is you don't have to like follow a formula. You don't have to say the same things, right? For some people, like Samira said, being the oldest sibling, right? For some people, being the oldest sibling is like a really transformative thing and you can tell a really great story about it. And others might choose to emphasize something else about their life, and that's perfectly fine. It's just kind of, yeah, whatever shapes your identity. Karan said first gen student, created their own path for entering the corporate world, moving to the States at 16 and creating a new life for myself. That's awesome. I love that. I think something else about this that I really love, and since I learned about this concept, is it's helped me realize like what I want my future to be. Just as much as it's important in these interviews and in stories to talk about your past and be able to tell stories about what you've done in an effective way, it's also really important to understand like your identity and who you want to be and how you want to build more identity capital in the future, right? So maybe you're applying somewhere and that job is going to give you the opportunity to travel or to live in a new place, and you can explain how, you've built this identity capital and you really value understanding the world from a multicultural lens and understanding how different pieces of culture kind of can strengthen each other and be combined to help a company grow. And you feel like you'll be able to build even more of that working in this new location or traveling to these different places. Amin talks about starting their career as an engineer surrounded by men. I said his and that if you're a woman. And it really shaped how I advocate for myself and other women regarding equitable pay, thanks to the men that share their compensation with me and mentored me. That's awesome. I love that. Yeah, I'm so sorry. I like said his not knowing,
It's okay.
and
It's
that was
okay.
totally my bad.
It's okay.
But I love your comment. That's something that's also been really important to me, is like learning how to stand up for myself as a woman, learning how to operate in an industry that, I only had really seen male examples or mentors in my life work in, and how to advocate for other women to enjoy it and learn that it's an option for them. So
Yeah, I think it's
thank you
also
for sharing.
important not to.
Okay, we're gonna go on to the next slide, but I just encourage all of you to, like, as you're doing this exercise and reflecting, think about, keep building a list of identity capital. Think about what hobbies, what experiences, what types of roles, what ways you can approach a challenge in your future you want to focus on, so you can build like even more an even more robust and, I don't know, authentic feeling set of identity capital. Okay, so now we're going to go into kind of more like mechanics of how to improve your personal story, how to tell stories. I'm going to show you one option for structuring a story. I think there's a lot of different ways people can frame stories, and there's not one that's perfect. You may have heard of like the STAR method. This is similar to the STAR method with a little bit, I guess, of added steps, but just kind of understanding the general idea of how to progress from framing to explaining the impact and talking about things in between can really help you as you're preparing for interviews. Feel free to take a screenshot of this slide if you want to be able to, try like to create some example stories from this structure. So the first point is to frame the situation, show who you are, where you were, what your role was, and speak with excitement about all of it. This, like, for example, if you're just talking about yourself, talking about where you're from, like what you've done in the past, it's obviously just like really general stuff, but the way that you frame it changes everything. So for example, like I could be like, hi, my name's Kristen. Excited to meet you. Yeah, I've worked in tech and consulting, and I grew up in Utah. Um, like, you can talk about it that way, right? You can list things, or I can frame it differently, and I can say, hey, I'm so excited to meet you. A little bit about my background. I grew up in the middle of nowhere in a small town in northern Utah. I worked on farms and was in a really agricultural area. I also learned to love sports. And as I got closer to graduating high school, I realized I wanted to move to a more urban area. And through my time studying English and business strategy, I realized I have a love for tech and building startups and doing things that help people find fulfilling work. So there's just kind of like two examples, right? Like you can frame your situation in a very bland, like I'm listing off bullet points kind of way. Like here you go, like here's the details of my life, or you can frame your situation in a very clear kind of story. The next one is to explain the task or the complication. So whether this is a personal story or a story about work experience, give a complication of some sort, give like a shifting point of some sort. Even in just that situation I said before, like I kind of expressed like a shifting point of like, I decided as I was getting close to graduating college that I wanted to move to an urban area, right? That's like some type of a shift that helps the person stay engaged and helps the person kind of understand like where you're leading them to. So I think sometimes, obviously, like if you're talking about, oh, tell me about a problem that you've solved or tell me about a work experience, it's pretty easy to include like a complication. But I think it's always a good idea to, once you give background, kind of give the person something to cling to or something to kind of, I don't know, it's like in any good book, any good movie, right? Like there's something where you're like, oh no, like that's not just a bullet point, that's something that will affect the future. And then talk about what you did in response, how you took control of a situation and chose to take something really complicated and make it better. An example of this, a story that I will often tell, is kind of about, I'll go. It's hard for me to only do one of the steps, I'm realizing, but for example, I'm talking about I was in a volunteer position and I was tasked with helping people who were learning English, helping immigrants who were learning English have a better experience. and there was no organization and there was no training for the volunteers that were helping immigrants. These immigrants learn English. And so I chose to schedule a meeting with the leader of this organization, even though it wasn't necessarily my responsibility, and outline a plan that I felt like could help us better organize and optimize the way that these volunteers were being trained. And from there, I started testing that plan with a bunch of the different volunteers, giving them short weekly trainings on how to structure their volunteer English classes. Anyway, that was maybe not the most perfect example ever. And if you guys have like feedback as I'm talking or thoughts on these steps, I would love to hear your thoughts. If you have any pushback or anything you would change, anything I could do to improve, would love to hear that as well. I'll have some of you, if anyone is feeling brave here in a minute, come off mute and do a story after our next exercise. But to finish, like these steps, after you talk about kind of what you did, talk about the outcome, right? After I did this training, and we really started to systematize the expectations for these volunteers, we saw massive growth over the next few months. So much growth that we ended up opening 2 additional locations in the urban area, and seeing tons and tons of people tell their friends and really like grow organically this system. If I was really on top of it, I would have, you know, an estimate of the percentage. Like we went from 1 location to 3 locations, and the number of participants went from, you know, increased by 200% in the next year or something like that. So I think with results, like having really clear numbers also really strengthens your case. This isn't always maybe the best situation or the most important if you're talking about a really personal story, like, you know, just telling about your background. But I think in most work situations, and even in some, you know, more personal situations, you can still really explain a result, like how many years did you do something, you know, how many promotions did you receive? Yeah, there's a variety of things like that you can talk about. So it's always good. It's something too that's really easy with results is to just think about your resume. Like, what do you talk about on your resume? Even the personal section of your resume could likely have results, right? I have a friend who does a lot of kind of like informal personal training and nutrition counseling, and so on their resume they say, I have coached or not even coached, I have helped more than 50 people create personalized like fitness and health plans. That's not something they make money for or anything they do crazy, but it's something they do, you know. Or someone else would I remember someone who was like an avid puzzle doer and they were like, I consistently achieve my goal of, you know, doing 1 puzzle a week. and that says something about you, right? Like it says that even in your personal life, like you're interesting, like you're interesting enough to bring up your passion about puzzles in this interview. And not only are you like interested in puzzles, but you actively engage in that, you're proactive, you make sure that you know, prioritize this thing that's important to you. So having like some type of result or outcome, even if it feels like a little bit silly, can really drive the point home that you're trying to make. And then finally, zoom out. So explain why you're telling that story, explain how it affects the role you're in, how it affects where you're at in your professional career. This is always important and probably the most important point, because once again, it shows that ability to like have good analysis of something. Like you can not only explain something well, but then you can analyze why it's impactful and what it means for you, for the person you're talking to. You know, even making connections like, yeah, I think, you know, I if you say you're talking to someone, you find you both love video games, and which this is like a bad example for me because I am not good at video games at all. But if you make this connection with the interviewer that you both really enjoy video games, and after talking about it for a minute, you zoom out and say, yeah, I think it's so interesting because, you know, I feel like both of us really value efficiency in our work, and we work on computers, we work in, say, software engineering, and it's so interesting how playing lots of video games can really translate to my ability to be efficient as I'm coding or something like that, right? I don't know if that's a great example, but um, just being able to kind of zoom out, connect different ideas, connect how a certain background, having like, for example, there's a couple people that talked about living in different countries, even different continents, zoom out and explain how that would affect your job if your job's in the United States and maybe not with international clients. Like, why is that important? What skills has that given you? Oh, okay. We do have a question. I guess this was a few minutes ago. Could you please share how to make it engaging? What would be the ideal time of the answer? If you can give a small example of the voice modulation part. Let's see. I'm trying to think of how to answer this. Can you please share how to make it engaging? What would be the ideal time of the answer? When you're Punit, maybe you can give me a little bit more clarity if you want to come off mute. In terms of how long an answer to a story should take, this is a really good question because it varies a lot. I think it's really easy to tend to ramble and kind of go on and on with stories if you haven't practiced them. If you're in a typical like 35 to 45-minute interview, I would recommend that most of your stories are within 2 to 5 minutes. It gives you enough time to explain something well, but it doesn't take so much time that it, kind of dominates the whole interview. Ideally, you want to get through quite a few questions, and ideally have time at the end to kind of have more casual conversation about interests and different things like that. So that's my rough guess, but obviously it depends. We're going to practice here on the next slide, kind of like an elevator pitch or like a tell me about yourself first question. And I would say that should be about 1 to 2 minutes. And then voice modulation, where do I talk about this on the slide? So yeah, just like with, I guess, just in general, the way, you can really say a lot with the way you talk, the way your hands move, right? Like I use my hands a lot when I'm talking, often if I'm talking about something. Oh, I think in this situation, there were really 3 key things that we did to help the client achieve their desired outcome and overcome this lag in growth. The first thing was having a really accurate assessment of the market. The second thing was, and I'll do this with my hands. I won't go through that whole example, but just like kind of signaling, like, right, because then the interviewer's like, oh, they're on to number 2. Oh, they're on to number 3. Great. This is really easy to follow. So hands are one. Voice modulation is another, where like, just varying how you talk. I try to talk with a lot of excitement and passion, and that includes like how the volume of how loud I'm talking. So I might get quieter as I'm explaining something complicated. Like, it was a really difficult time for the company. They had to lay off about 25% of their workforce, and I was asked to take on the responsibilities of 3 other people. After a couple months of interviewing different people on the team and creating a new documentation system to more accurately track all the different product updates and content updates we were pushing, we saw a massive increase in customer engagement and a massive increase in our NPS score. Do you see how kind of I'm like talking about the problem and I'm kind of like a little bit quieter, a little bit more like monotone almost with my expression, and then as soon as like I talk about, we saw a massive increase in the NPS score, and then I'm like emphasizing those words, I'm talking a little bit louder. So that's kind of what I would say with like voice modulation and how to just use all of the tools you have to interview well. And hands, voice, facial expression, all those things. Okay, we're gonna go on to the next little activity. So this is a classic tell me about yourself story. They may not always say at the beginning of an interview, tell me about yourself, but often they do. And even if they don't, you kind of want to make an introduction of some sort. So I don't even know if I did like a full one in this. I've kind of given you my tell me about myself in pieces, but the goal of this is to provide like a really quick snapshot of like who you are, where you came from, right? So this is going through those exact steps we talked about. Talk about like a formative event or a complication. It can be pretty recent, could be in the past. Often it should relate to like why you're in the interview you're in or why you're searching for the job you're searching for. Talk about a few of the things you've done in life, so past experience, educationally, professionally. You could throw in a couple of like extracurricular hobbies type things if those are really relevant. Explain what results you've driven. This shouldn't be too specific in a tell me about yourself, but you can just kind of high level explain maybe, you know, getting promoted or you know, securing a really impressive role after transitioning from one industry to another or something like that. And then finally, articulate what makes you unique and why you're a cool person. Like, just kind of end with something interesting. You know, often I like to end these with, in my free time, I love doing all these different things. And I think that helps people be like, oh, like, wow, that's cool, you know? And you're excited to talk about kind of some of your personal interests. So I'm gonna give you guys like a minute, 30 seconds, 2 minutes to think about this and how you would craft a tell me about yourself story. Again, goal is between 1 and 2 minutes. And then I'll have maybe 2 brave volunteers come off mute and try it out. Okay, we'll wrap it up. Does anybody want to come off mute and practice the tell me about yourself story? Amin, go ahead. Am I saying your name right?
No,
Amin,
but it's
Amin?
okay. It's Amin. Can you hear me? Are you able to hear me?
I can hear you now. Yep.
Okay. Yeah, I was saying that it's Amin.
Amin, okay, perfect.
Yeah, I was still writing, but I know my story from the top of my head. So,
Okay, let's hear it.
yeah, so my name is Amin. I'm very passionate about 2 things in humanity, which is access and information. So currently, I'm a senior product marketing manager in tech. And what led me there is the average Nigerian, where I'm from, makes about 64,000 naira a month, which is about 20 something dollars a month. And I don't think that that's something that people can live off of. So even though I had a career in engineering, I did that for about 12 years in the energy industry, I decided to pivot into the tech industry, specifically working on products for consumers, creators, and businesses to allow them to monetize platforms and make income outside of a traditional 9 to 5 in places like Nigeria, where even college educated people are making 40 something dollars a month. So that's what led me into specifically working on creator monetization, thought leadership monetization businesses, because that gives people who don't have access uh, to capital like that to be able to create that income for themselves and have something sustainable. So when I pivoted from engineering, I started working at Twitter on subscriptions, and then I worked at Twitch, and then most recently Meta, all working on subscription monetization and payments. And that's why I'm interested in this role, and that's why that's my niche, because of I just want to help elevate people out of poverty.
Amazing. Great job. That was 1 minute and 20 seconds, which is great time. Yeah, I think you did an excellent job starting with your passions. That's a really great way to frame something, right? This is I'm Amin, and these are my two things I'm passionate about. And these passions have guided all these steps I've taken. And then you kind of walked me through like some of the pivots and changes you've had in your career, and also told me about your background throughout that. So really great job. I think you also showed kind of like that there's a lot of different ways to structure a story. You don't always have to have the same flow necessarily. You can sometimes talk about, you don't have to go from like frame the situation to the complication to what you did about it. Sometimes it's like really kind of interwoven. And I think like, yeah, over and over again through your story, I heard like I made changes because I wanted to help people get out of poverty. And I think like after that introduction, I feel like I know you're a very purpose-driven person. So yeah, you said I like to go present, past, future, back to present, maybe in a conversational way. I think that's an awesome way to think about it as well. Um, yeah, I love your story. I think one thing you could have done to improve it a little bit is tell me a little bit sooner, like exactly what you were doing in creator monetization, or like I was a little bit unclear, I guess, of like um, the roles you've had or like specific things that you've done, and then you kind of more specifically said towards the end, oh, I work at these specific companies in creator monetization, and maybe like seeing a little bit more about like what your next step is, or like what you're looking for now, or something maybe that you're passionate about outside of work. Sometimes it's too short to do that, and that's totally fine. But those
Yeah,
are just additional thoughts.
I thought I was getting to 2 minutes, so that's why I stopped. But yes, I usually add also that I speak Japanese is something that it was my minor in college. So I usually add that if it has anything to do with the role. Like, let's say the role says that they want someone to speak Japanese or that it will be in Japan, then I'll mention it. Otherwise, sometimes when I do that, it does look a little bit like, okay, that's cool, but it depends on the interviewer. Some of them are okay with it. Others are like, okay, what does that have to do with what we're here for today? So it really depends on the interviewer and what we're talking about. And then role specific, I'll mention like other fun facts. Like I love building community and things like that.
Yeah, that's great. And you definitely do want to cater to the interviewer. Sometimes what I tell people, like if they feel like they're bragging, because there's a line, right? You don't want to be like, oh, and I speak Japanese and like I'm throwing out all these accolades.
Right.
But something I sometimes will do is like I speak Spanish, but I don't always feel like that's appropriate to say. So I'll be like, in my free time outside of work, I love learning about Spanish and traveling to Spanish speaking countries or something like that.
Yeah, I like that. That's good. Yeah, because you don't want it to fall flat and it's like, okay, thanks.
Yeah, exactly. You got to read the room. Okay, anyone else want to go? We have time for one more. Josh, yeah, go for it.
Okay, thanks. My name's Josh. I'm passionate about technology, culture, fitness, and health. I've worked in various different industries, from aerospace, non-for-profit, software, technology, and in recently retail and e-commerce. Some recent challenges I faced in roles I've been part of have been uniting teams across multiple continents and countries and cities, as I imagine many of us have. But it has really provided me, through my experience traveling and living abroad in different countries, I think a diverse set of experiences, and that has helped me solve some of these challenges with uniting teams and people, and helping unify us into a common cause and effort to bring us together. So one of them recently was I worked at Arc'teryx, and we were looking to bring in a solution for personalization on the website. We had a series of different challenges with data that we needed to resolve. So we had to bring together the marketing teams, brand teams, technology teams, and then cross-functional partners to come up with a solution in how to resolve this. And yeah, through close collaboration, I was able to spearhead the resolution and solution, bringing in the Salesforce team to help us come up with a solution that was then applied and provided us with a workable solution that is now in place today on the Arc'teryx website. So yeah, that is my experience. I think that's what gives me maybe a bit of advantage over some. I am a history student and a political science major, not computer science, and I think that also has provided me a bit of an edge and a different perspective that is unique from others. So that's about it. I don't know if that was 2 minutes.
Awesome. It was just over 2 minutes.
Perfect.
So good job. Yeah, I love how you also started with like what you were passionate about, and you kind of jumped into talking about this specific experience at Arc'teryx and how you did something that like what really stood out to me was like you got it on the website, you helped kind of bring together a messy situation of a lot of different people in the room and create something that was more organized. Love how you talked at the end about having a different background in your field and how that gives you a different perspective. I would have loved to see a little bit more like what is that different perspective, like what do you do because you're a history major that makes you like a better person than someone that has a technical background. But yeah, talking about as Amin said, like bringing up why you stand out is always great, right? Like I feel like this is I've been different from people in this way, and it's really helped me. This is like I'm losing my train of thought, but yeah, like what you said, how you've used your background to fulfill a role, even though it's maybe not traditional, and how that can be an advantage. I think every employer, I think, wants to build diverse teams that are also like connected and mesh well. So being able to show both of those things, that you can connect with someone and that you also have like a diverse set of experience, even if that's not, like a typical thing that like you're different, if you're like ethnic background is not different from most of the people at the company you're interviewing with, I think almost everybody can find something that makes them different. And even if that's just like a hobby they have or something they're passionate about, and talk about how that affects the way they work. So yeah, really good job, Josh. You as well. Like I would have loved to hear like one or two things like about your personal life, or maybe like a few more things you've done. Like all I really heard was that you worked at Arc'teryx, so maybe like tightening up the story about enabling cross-team collaboration. You talked about that a lot. You could probably say that in fewer words and spend a few more words on a few other things that you've done, even if it's just kind of listing them off or talking about this is how I got to Arc'teryx or something. But yeah, great job.
Thanks for the feedback.
Okay. We've just got a couple minutes left. Really quickly, I just want to emphasize that first and last impressions do matter. So why we practice this question is because this will often be the kickoff of a conversation with someone. And if you do that well, you can have a lot of grace for a lot of mistakes for the rest of the interview. Right, I think both Josh and Amin like really made themselves memorable instantly. I was like, okay, I'm gonna remember who they are, what they're passionate about, what they've done, and I'm not gonna forget them very easily. So make sure that first thing you say, that first story you tell is memorable. And then afterwards you can do a lot. This is a little bit less with like stories, but I think important for just general interviewing and networking conversations. Say thank you, be really courteous, be really grateful that they're, using their time to get to know you. And then this last one is like, yeah, just showcase like, ending, like as Josh did, like ending by saying, this is why I'm a really great candidate and I have this unique background and I did this thing. Kind of all of that was bundled up at the end of that get to know you, which enables me to be like, okay, like he drives impact and he also like has some unique accomplishments or background pieces. So I know we're coming up on 45 minutes. So I'll quickly do a Q&A. And yeah, if anyone has questions, we'll spend a couple minutes on Q&A. I will send the link to my coach profile right now. If any of you have to jump and want to book time. Oops. might be seeing some crazy things on my screen. But yeah, feel free to come off mute if you have questions. Maybe nobody has questions.
Hi, Kristen. So I had a quick question. I mean, I've been using this strategy of like expressing answers through stories, but one thing I usually get lost is not keeping a track of time or like having those stories being concise while giving enough detail. So, any suggestions on improving there?
Yeah, good question. Practice the stories you often tell in a non-interview situation. The best way to do this is to get a stopwatch, time yourself. You could even record yourself and then listen to it. And repeating that even just 2 times will help you improve drastically. One other thing I think is helpful to do is to just outline the points you want to talk about. And sometimes it's helpful for me to like use my hands and be like, okay, 1, 2, 3. Once I get to 3, I'm done. I'm just gonna list them off and then keep going. So that can help you not ramble as much as well. Good question. Okay. If you have more questions, send them in the chat. I'm happy to stay on and answer them afterwards. But just to kind of quickly talk about Leland and one-on-one coaching, we obviously do a lot of different things. We have courses, community events, which is what you're attending right now, and one-on-one coaching. Leland covers a huge variety of categories. This event is technically a career development event, so just kind of general career help. But we also do a lot with school admissions, all types of different roles in tech and finance and consulting and medicine. There's a huge variety of categories. So go take a look at Leland's website. You can see all that we have to offer. And if you want to work with me in any type of coaching capacity, but the most relevant to this session would be a type of like storytelling feedback session. So you can just come and practice a few stories that you want to tell in interviews, and I'll give you feedback on them. We can help refine them. Sometimes it's just good too to, you hold yourself accountable to practicing those stories by committing to doing them with another person. So all of you can get 20% off your first session with that code. And you can also book a free 15-minute intro call to just chat with me through your strategy for storytelling, interviews, jobs, any of those things. I'm happy to help with. And yeah, it was so great chatting with all of you tonight. I hope this was a helpful session. I have a lot more resources related to identity capital and personal branding and learning how to kind of shape your passions, your values, and things you talk about there as well that I like to do in one-on-one coaching. So yeah, thanks all for joining, and I hope you have a wonderful night.
Thanks, Kristen.
Take care. See you later.
Thanks,
Hi, Kristen.
Kristen.
Kristen, can you hear me?
I can.
Okay, I think I just have one quick question.
Yeah.
So I've been kind of like brainstorm. Like I know Storybank, they have a lot of different angle. So how can I like make sure that my stories is enough to answer all the angle? Like how do you like brainstorm?
Are you saying like how do you brainstorm what stories to tell so you can talk about a bunch of different angles, or like within one story how do you cover enough?
I think I just want to make sure that when I hear the question, I will not like feel unprepared.
Gotcha. Yeah, that is a good question, and it can be hard. So I think writing down a list and kind of having a bank of different experiences that you have, like you could make a few categories like problem solving stories or leadership stories, and then write down a few things that could fit into that could fit into a lot of different questions. And also just with, answering the question well and being prepared, don't be afraid to pause for 15 or 30 seconds. When I was interviewing actually with the CEO of Leland to work here, I remember he asked me a question and I was like, oh, wow. I don't know. Like, that's a really good question. Let me think about that for a second. And I just sat there for 20 seconds and thought, and then I was able to give him like a pretty good response. So don't be afraid to ask for time to think.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Okay, anybody else have questions? Let's see if a few of you are still on. Okay, well, if not, I'll go ahead and end the session. But thank you all for joining and have